Chapter 1. Introduction. Abstract. Buying power as economic methodology developed within a broader effort to impose black capitalism as an alternative to political or social equality and citizenship. An evolving black business class adopted and adapted the methodology to their own particular racialized class interests and used their relationship to the larger economy to help create a black or Negro market to be targeted by a more wealthy and white commercial corporate advertising community. Keywords: Fred Hampton, Jay-Z, black bourgeoisie, power, black capitalism. In 2017, Jay-Z's The Story of OJ dropped and immediately became an enormous topic of conversation, as much for its apparent astute economic analysis as for its visual walk down memory lane riddled with the tremendous wreckage of heavily propagated anti-black imagery. The juxtaposition of visuals depicting a national oppression with lyrics largely framing that oppression as resulting today from financial illiteracy beautifully demonstrates so many of the contradictions discussed below. The anti-black mythologies developed and carried through the video's images, filled with historic reminders of institutional, state-supported racism, drawn with painfully accurate, ironic depictions of Disney and Warner Brothers' own viciously anti-black cartoon histories, are, however, imbalanced by the accompanying lyrics, which point instead to black ignorance as the cause of existing inequality. In the video, crosses burn while Dr. Huey Newton and the Black Panther Party are, ironically, lampooned. But the lyrics speak to a very different politics. In full contradiction of the wonderfully drawn images of institutionally imposed black trauma, the lyrics speak only to black ignorance, literally described as, quote, Dumbo, end quote. Specific to the mythology of buying power, Jay-Z explains that unlike Jews who, quote, own all the property in America, end quote, black people are only, quote, throwing away money at a strip club, end quote. Further, again, contradicting the lampooned image of the quite political Black Panther Party, Jay-Z speaks in imposed political pessimism, saying that, quote, financial freedom my only hope, end quote, and proceeds to discuss flipping property, art, and music sales as viable pathways to get there. Carter et al., 2017. Indeed, the story of OJ is a metaphor for opportunities wasted due to poor individual choices and is meant, as Jay-Z has said, to be more than just a song, saying that it is really about, quote, we as a culture having a plan, how we're going to push this forward, end quote. Surah 2017, emphasis added. The expressed, quote, plan, end quote, is to eschew politics in favor of a sole focus on economics, black capitalist economics, with buying power as a central philosophy, as the, quote, only hope, end quote, for freedom, and all presented as progressive, pro-black empowerment messaging. Interestingly, Jay-Z was born the day Chicago Black Panther Party members Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were killed. December 4th, 1969 marks both the birth of one of the greatest rappers and entrepreneurs in history and the death of two members of one of history's most impactful political organizations, with Hampton targeted specifically for assassination in a coordinated effort led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the Chicago Police Department. One has made clear during his multi-decade career that he aspires to the highest of capitalist heights, and the other was disposed of by the U.S. federal government in part for aggressively espousing the redistributionist politics of socialism. One is today a leading force in popular culture and even political activism. The others have had their lives relatively suppressed beneath omitting histories and popular representations carried, for instance, by the even more impressively entrepreneurial, well promoted, and popular spouse of Jay Z. The performative allusions by Beyonce Knowles to the Black Panther Party and radical black histories have in many ways become those histories' most dominant and well distributed symbols. After 40 years, former Black Panther Assata Shakur remains in exile under renewed calls for her extradition from Cuba and imprisonment in the United States. Beyonce tours with $50 million Pepsi sponsorships and $60 million Netflix deals. Jay-Z has helped sell nearly every major name brand and has even become the recent face of the NBA and NFL as they've expanded franchises and into politics. Beyonce and Jay-Z have become among today's biggest proponents of black capitalism, couched often in the aesthetic or language of black power. The beginning and end represented in that 1969 exchange of lives and politics would be charted beautifully the following year in Earl O'Farrell's The Myth of Black Capitalism, 1970. Itself found a year later in the prison cell of George Jackson, another assassinated and often forgotten member of the Black Panther Party, whose image has also been previously appropriated by the equally commercial rapper Rule, 2003. O'Farrell's work took on and disposed of the broader mythologizing of black capitalism and its subsidiaries, black banking, investing, saving, and business as methods of ending economic inequality. His work was published at the height of this country's struggle over black capitalism's promotion, largely by the administration of President Richard Nixon, and adopted by a more conservative black business class as a response to increasingly left-leaning and radical black political movements. The fear of an advancing black power movement, including the Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army, that increasingly espoused variants of Pan-Africanist, nationalist, socialist, and communist politics encouraged, in part, the promotion of material potential and black capitalism as a more viable, pragmatic, or mature solution. The crux of O'Farrell's argument in the end remains a centerpiece of what follows here. Black people do not have enough money or access to larger national and global economies to have what wealth does exist among black people to, in any meaningful way, improve the material, economic, and lived conditions of the black community as a whole. Attempts by black people in the United States to marshal their resources to the benefit of the whole, and the various ways these attempts were bound to fail, were all laid out by O'Farrell, but remain today in popular fashion absent much O'Farrell-like criticism. We hear today the same arguments made for more than a century, and long since proven insufficient. Buy black, bank black, circulate the black dollar within the community, and, as I will argue, use more intelligently the buying power of black America. What differs most today is the propulsion of mythology as propaganda in an existing media environment more consolidated in its ownership and penetrative in its reach than ever. Further, I will demonstrate the inherent class tensions playing out in this history as the myth of black buying power remains one developed in part and propelled by a black business class and commercial press who benefit most from the claim as part of their pursuit of advertising revenue and investment. Buying power, as we know it today, is largely a fiction developed and promoted by a black business class which has its own specific origins and tradition. As Ofari explained, black investigators have, from time to time, been forced to deal with various aspects of, quote, black, unquote, business and the possibility of an independent black economy. The most prominent of these investigators, black sociologist E. Franklin Frazier, came to the conclusion that, quote, black, unquote, business was a myth. Frazier, in his seminal work, Black Bourgeoisie, went on to give an extended analysis of the historic trends that have led to the current enthusiasm for black business and its embrace by black leaders. As Frazier has written regarding these black leaders, the myth of Negro business is tied up with the belief in the possibility of a separate Negro economy. Of course, behind the idea of the separate Negro economy is the hope of the black bourgeoisie that they will have the monopoly of the Negro market. Ofari 9. Capturing a black market, however, has limitations, given the limitations on black economic potential. For the segment of the black bourgeoisie involved in media, journalism, or advertising to, quote, capture, end quote, meant delivering a newly created black market packaged in a mythic economic strength, labeled buying power, to white corporate ad buyers. Buying power would become a primary mechanism by which black media and business could attract white investment. If black people had billions to spend, the myth began. Then, white ad buyers would find great value in spending their ad buying dollars on black owned and black targeted media. But it was the very promotion of this myth of black buying power by a black media and business elite that has created a journalistic echo chamber, with one consequence being the adoption of the myth by any number of black political, religious, or activist leadership as a particular gateway to economic freedom, or at least parity. Buying power, though, in its origin and current application as a marketing tool for advertisers, is applied to all and any segmented formation of society, including corporations and municipalities. Its relationship to black political struggle, it being a focal point of a solution to centuries-old dilemmas, is particular to black America. And, as will be discussed, the installation of buying power as a tactic toward a collective black advance carries a specific brand of violence, in that its reframing as a concept by the hands of a black business and media elite is meant to satisfy their own version of adopted anti-black and class-based interests. Still, with Frazier, this, quote, black bourgeoisie, end quote, caught in a liminality between wanting distance from, quote, the Negro masses, end quote, while simultaneously, quote, suffering contempt from the white world, end quote, has created in its isolation what might be described as a world of make-believe, in which it attempts to escape the disdain whites and fulfill its wish for status in American life. One of the most striking indications of the unreality of the social world which the black bourgeoisie created is its faith in the importance of, quote, Negro business, end quote, i.e., the business enterprises owned by Negroes and catering to Negro customers. Although these enterprises have little significance either from the standpoint of the American economy or the economic life of the Negro, a social myth has been created that they provide a solution to the Negro's economic problems. faith in this social myth and others is perpetuated by the Negro newspapers, which represent the largest and most successful business enterprises established by Negroes. Fraser, 1957, 27, emphasis added. Jay-Z's lionized lyrics are indicative of the culminating effect of the half-century process of propagating economic mythologies as part of capturing markets. The verses accept and regurgitate key elements of the myth of black buying power and capitalism, blaming poverty on the poor, all while further encouraging an imposed commercialism, product marketing, and promotion of conspicuous consumption, which has by now come to fully dominate and manage the content of popular media, Rossini, 2015, and popular culture commercial hip hop, Ball, 2011. Like much of Jay's entire career catalog, this more recent contribution, from one who reminds, is, quote, not a businessman, end quote, but a, quote, businessman, end quote, suggests an economic potential which is only left unreached due to ignorance among the community and reflects back a popularly disseminated fallacy that the poor, specifically the black poor, do not take advantage of opportunities as others have. Jews, according to Jay, unlike black people, quote, own all of the property in America, end quote, because of their ability to rise above petty dealings, quote, gram holding, end quote, and understand the value of not, quote, throwing away money at a strip club, end quote. But this is just one more example of popularly circulating mythologies about North American capitalism, race, religion, ethnicity, and specifically buying power or consumption as a pathway to either poverty or wealth, and the potential for Black Americans to mimic those patterns of behavior with similar degrees of success. Consumerism, spending habits, good or bad, do not determine collective wealth or an economic strength. No community becomes rich, nor can one become poor as a result of their spending. Black people are not poor for having missed out on previous opportunities or by choosing today out of some form of cultural deformity or intractable financial illiteracy to, as Jay-Z suggests, foolishly give away potential communal wealth by shopping. Jay-Z, like most commercial artists and art, reflects a racial and class politics, often masked by talent and performance. The art becomes an extension of the commercial, political, and ideological marketing forces who own the media product, often not the artists themselves, along with its means of production and distribution. It stands to reason then that, as I and others have shown, Ball 2011, much of the popular commercial media and art has become literal marketing for products and contains many of the same advertising industry mechanisms for selling wares, as well as ideas, myths, regarding the national economic arrangement. If hip hop can be used to sell cars, clothes, and jewelry, it certainly can be used to sell equally fantastical notions of achieving, quote, financial freedom, end quote. Inherent to Jay-Z's verse in the idea that Black buying power is both real and squandered, Jay suggests that a redirection of Black consumption habits can meaningfully overturn existing inequality and that no other significant barriers to that overthrow exist. But what Jay-Z also demonstrates is the ubiquity of economic mythology and the many ways through which those myths are conveyed to wider audiences. What follows is my attempt to demonstrate, at a minimum, the absence of any real buying power, the origins of the concept, its appropriation later by business and media interests, and then also the mechanism and context in which this and other myths originate, persist, and thrive. Specifically, the myth and propaganda of Black buying power demonstrates the claim that African America has roughly $1 trillion in, quote, buying power, end quote, is popularly repeated mythology with no basis in sound economic logic or data. While the myth has a longer history, it is today largely propelled by misreadings and poor, false interpretations of Nielsen surveys and marketing reports produced by the Selig Center for Economic Growth at the Terry College of Business, housed in the Bank of America Financial Center in Athens, Georgia, and where, as their website explains, their bias and purpose is in their founding mission. The center was created to convey economic expertise to Georgia businesses and entrepreneurs. The Simon S. Selig Jr. Center for Economic Growth is primarily responsible for conducting research on economic, demographic, and social issues related to Georgia's current and future growth. Emphasis added. Quote, buying power, end quote, is a marketing phrase that refers only to the, quote, power, end quote, of consumers to purchase what are strictly available goods and is used as a measurement for corporations to better market their products. Most of the contemporary and popular understanding of the myth of buying power is derived from and maintained by a commercial Black press whose own commercial interests, attracting advertising dollars from the largest white corporations, supersede any journalistic mission to properly inform. Quote, power, end quote, here has nothing to do with actual economic strength, and there is no collective $1+ trillion that Black people have and just foolishly spend ignorantly to their economic detriment. The myth of, quote, buying power, end quote, functions as propaganda working to deny the reality of structural, intentional, and necessary economic inequality required to maintain society as it is, one that benefits an increasingly decreasing number of people. To do this, the myth functions to falsely blame the poor for being poor. Poverty, the myth encourages, is the result of the poor having little to no, quote, financial literacy, end quote, or as resulting from their bad spending habits, when in reality, poverty is an intended result of an economic and social system. Anyone at all familiar with any part of the Black public sphere will have heard one form or another of the following. Quote, if we just used our money like other communities, if we didn't spend so much on hair, cars, and weed, we could make our dollars circulate like they do and be far better off. End quote. More specifically, those familiar with like spaces would have heard reference to, quote, the numbers, end quote, that, quote, Black America's economy makes it among the most powerful national economies in the world, end quote, and that, quote, we have a $1+ trillion that we just misuse, end quote. From the most isolated and forcibly marginalized radical activist spaces to the most commonly populated spheres of Black public discourse, the refrain is consistent and always suggests the same: that at least a solid portion of the Black oppressive political pie is comprised of a financially illiterate, backwards mass incapable of correcting itself to take proper advantage of a freedom which waits just slightly beyond their feeble grasp. The suggestion that Black people lack, quote, financial literacy, end quote, and therefore ignorantly refuse existing opportunities to advance economically obliterates the realities of capitalism as an economic and social system or conditions that system creates. The idea is as simple as it is wrong, but is masked by a surrounding powerful and heavily propagated mythology. the, quote, buying power, end quote, of Black America, it is often repeated, now said to have crossed $1 trillion annually, is foolishly squandered, but with some unity could be harnessed to overturn the centuries old and eerily consistent economic deprivations suffered still. However, quote, buying power, end quote, as a concept popularly held, is entirely misunderstood and has been by so many for so long that it continues to confound and inhibit conversations about economics in general, the specifics of the Black economic condition, and what might be done about it. And while all communities, all segments of all communities, businesses, municipalities, and so on have their, quote, buying power, end quote, assessed, it is only in relation to Black America that the concept becomes truly mythologized. Beyond that, the myth is politically weaponized with a very particular perniciousness and pervasiveness metastasized to the, quote, conceptual original sin, end quote, of American racism, Downing and Husband, 2005. The misunderstanding and misapplication of the concept of buying power by those both friendly and hostile to the Black community is unparalleled anywhere in political